Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, one and all. Thank you very much for coming out tonight. Just a few words of introduction before I hand over to our chair for the evening. This is the first of what I hope will be a series of events that YesCymru BRIDGEND will be holding. And just to give you a little background, why are we holding this debate tonight? Well, certainly from my point of view, there's three main reasons. The first one is that last year, after we had our local government elections, the Electoral Commission issued a report on their research findings, and the headline finding was that young people in particular were both disengaged from politics and felt they weren't being taught enough about it in school and college. So this is why we've held it in a college. We've tried to encourage as many young people as possible to come along tonight. We will continue to do that because we think it's important. The second reason is that the Welsh Government, as you may know, has set up an independent commission on the Constitution. They've issued an interim report already, and one of their main findings was that the current constitutional situation is inadequate to the task, certainly as far as Wales is concerned. Change is required. And the final reason, of course, is that there are developments afoot that everyone knows about in Scotland and Ireland. Ireland could be reunited before long, Scotland could be independent before long. No one, I hope, would want to wait until either or both of those happen before we think about Wales. We need to plan for it now. So that's why we're holding the debate. I would like very much to thank the panel for coming along. They didn't have to do this. They didn't know what they were getting themselves into necessarily, but they've all come along in the spirit of opening up the debate, which is well needed. Now, I should explain from a personal point of view again, in organising this, uppermost in my mind was the need to have a diverse panel. Now, it doesn't take a genius to work out we don't actually have a diverse panel tonight. I apologise for that. It wasn't for want of trying. Various reasons why we don't have the diversity we would like. Lots of people that we asked weren't available or didn't feel they could come along because of the nature of their work and so on. We have Conservative, Labour and Plaid Cymru represented here tonight. Liberal Democrats could offer no spokesperson to come tonight. I hope that will change in future, and I hope indeed that we will get a more diverse panel. We will certainly be aiming for that. So, without more ado, I'll introduce the panel, starting with the chair, obviously. Will Hayward here, Welsh Affairs Editor at Wales Online. He's also author of a book, Independent Nation, Should Wales Leave the UK? I believe he has copies over here, or with him. No, doesn't have them here.
I want to say it's sold out, but they haven't.
He'd be very happy to sell you copies one way or another, I'm sure. So for the Conservatives, you have Tom Giffard. He's one of the Senedd members for South Wales West. He's a history and politics graduate by background. For Labour, we have Hefin David, who's the Senedd member for Caerphilly. He has several degrees in economics and politics before entering into politics full-time. For Plaid Cymru, we have Luke Fletcher. He's another Senedd member for South Wales West, very local. He walked here tonight. He has degrees in politics, international relations and Welsh government. And finally, representing YesCymru is Christine Moore. She's a director of YesCymru. She's on the National Governing Body, I believe it's called. Yeah. Yes, there we are. She's a former chair of YesCymru BRIDGEND, and by profession she's trust manager for a Welsh Chapels charity. So I should also explain that we will be recording tonight's event, just so that you're aware of that. The speaking order has been chosen at random before we came down here tonight. And each speaker will have a maximum of 10 minutes to present his or her argument. And then we'll have the discussion opened up to the floor for questions and answers. We'll have a mic to come round, so I'd ask If you'd like to ask a question, put your hand up and wait until the mic gets to you. Now, we don't have any simultaneous translation equipment here tonight. I am it. So if you wish to ask a question in Welsh, I will translate it for whoever doesn't speak Welsh. Please bear with me on that. I hope we have a lively debate, but most of all, let's make it respectful, please. We're in Wales. There's a Twitter hashtag if you should want to tweet about this. BRIDGEND Indie Debate, either during or after the event. And last of all, please can I ask you all to mute your phones. Now, there's no fire alarm test scheduled for tonight, so if you should hear the alarm, please make your way out through to the nearest fire exit, and we'll show you where to congregate. And I will hand over now to our chair, Will Hayward. Thank you, Will.
Okay, thanks very much, everyone. Can everyone hear me at the back as well? Excellent, thumbs up, good stuff. I'd like to go on record to start with to say I judge all of you that you've got nothing better to do on a Friday night. I'd like to start with that. Obviously, just been a bit facetious. I think it's a really important debate for us to have. As you've mentioned, my name is Will. I work for Wales Online. You might have read a few of my pieces if you can get past the bloody adverts. Actually, we'll see. So I recently, as you said, I wrote a book about Welsh independence. It didn't fall down on either side of the argument. It was essentially a toolkit for forming your own opinion. And I like to think that the same two different people could read that book and come to a different conclusion based on their identity, attitude to risk, where they live in Wales, income. But I think it's an important debate to have. So just these guys are going to nail their colours to the mast fairly strongly, I imagine. So just to be clear, I made the mistake of Googling my name earlier this week, and I can tell you that I am a Welsh Tory stooge, a Plaid sleeper agent, and a Labour puppet. So I'm obviously very impartial because everyone seems to actively dislike me. So hopefully that'll be nice and fair. What I would say when it comes to Welsh independence, I am totally on board with the idea of an independent Wales. I'm open to that idea. As yet, I personally, through my research, I'm yet to be fully convinced that is the way to go. But potentially after tonight, after this debate, I might change that point of view. And like many people in Wales, I'm there to be convinced. So I think that's something that the indie movement should be open to. The book itself had very few conclusions. The only one it really came to was that the current system doesn't work for Wales. I don't think anyone can look at the poverty stats, for instance, in Wales. 600,000 children, a third of which, that's 200,000, live below the poverty line. That's not a system which works, and I don't think it's one that anyone would want to sustain in its current form, because it clearly isn't working. The other conclusion it comes to is that the campaign starts not when a referendum is called, not when a referendum is won. An independent Wales starts now. It's how we conduct the debate. It's how we go about convincing people. It's how, it's how the independent side goes about convincing people. It's about how the unionist side conducts themselves as well. So when we have these debates, people who disagree with you, they're not your enemy. They're people who you're trying to convince, they're trying to convince you. I think it's also best to have these debates from the point of view of facts and as much information as you possibly can. And sometimes the answers to these questions are, we don't know, or it depends, and that's absolutely fine. I think one of the problems with previous referendums is when we didn't know, we didn't say. We just said, yeah, everything will be great, or everything will be terrible. So let's have a even debate, a fair debate from the point of view as factually as possible. So, I know the panellists to varying degrees. One thing I do know they all have in common is they all want what's best for Wales. The only thing they differ on is how we get to that. So let's be civil, let's be fair, let's acknowledge we're all friends here. Okay? I'm going to start with a quick poll. I'm going to ask everyone to raise their hand. There's 5 options. Option 1 is I am totally and utterly in favour of Welsh independence. Nothing you're going to say tonight is going to convince me otherwise. That's number 1. Number 2 is I'm leaning towards Welsh independence. I could be convinced otherwise, but that's the way I'm leaning. Number 3, I've got no idea. I'm completely undecided. Number 4 is I'm leaning towards the unionist side. I'm leaning to pro-UK. I could be convinced otherwise. And then number 5, we have Welsh independence is absolutely insane. What are we doing here? This is a crazy debate to even have. Okay, so we're going to see if anyone changes their view at the start and the end of the debate. We'll see. Okay, so if you think you're number one, super pro indie, raise your hand. Good luck, guys.
Oh, this is going to be fun, isn't it? This is going to be fun, Tom.
If you think you're number two. Okay, so people leaning towards indie. If you are undecided, unsure. Excellent, okay. Number four, leaning towards union side, but not sure, okay. And number five, what are we doing? Okay, we've got a few over here. We're going to call it Monmouth shit. Okay, see what? Great stuff. Okay, brilliant. Right, so the way we're going to start is with each candidate's got up to each candidate. You can tell I've done hustings before, can't you? Each speaker is going to speak for 10 minutes. When they've got 30 seconds left, I'll give them a little nudge, and we'll go through each of them in turn, going from my left to my right. Then we will go to audience questions through till about 9 o'clock, which is when it will get fun and hopefully rowdy in a very civil way. Okay? Great stuff. So we will start off with Luke Fletcher, who's a MS for Plaid Cymru.
Just well, Steve mentioned that that she could walk to here from my house around the corner, and the entire way I was thinking bloody hope I'm not first now. But here we go. Here we are. It's been said a few times, I think, around tonight and lead up to tonight that independence is no longer a fringe issue, and I think actually the fact that we're having this debate proves that. I still think we have a way to go. Along my walk to the venue tonight, I passed the pub I used to walk in, not walk in, but work in, and many of the people there knew that this debate was happening tonight, but are they here? No, so there's still, I think, a job of work for us as those who are in favour of independence to engage some of those people who might not necessarily come to an event like tonight. If you were to ask me actually that an event like this would have happened here back when I was a kid, I wouldn't have thought it would have. I definitely wouldn't have thought it would have, because this was actually a field at the time before this STEAM Academy was set up, and when I was a student, if you would have told me I'd have spent my Friday night discussing politics, I also would have told you probably not as well. But I started actually talking about Pencoed because Pencoed, I think, is an important town to consider in this debate. It's a predominantly working class town. It has a huge portion of its population that commutes not just to Cardiff and Swansea but also beyond as well. It's a town that still revolves around the community. It still revolves around our pubs. It still revolves around our rugby clubs and our football clubs. It's a town where everybody knows everybody. A classic Welsh town in many ways. And the reason I start with Pencoed is because I think if you can convince people in Pencoed that independence is the way forward, then there you have a blueprint that you can export to other towns across Wales, not just in South Wales, but across Wales. I think it would be somewhat useful for me to talk about my journey to supporting independence. In some ways it's very typical of the larger population in terms of my background. Very untypical as well because I was a young person interested in politics. But admittedly, I don't come from a massive political family. I have spoken in the past about my old man being a trade union rep and holding some of those meetings in the kitchen in my house when I was growing up. But we never actually talked about politics in the sense of political parties and what was going on in Parliament. It wasn't a topic around the dinner table. In fact, I think a lot of my family was surprised that I got involved in politics in the first place. But what my family was a working-class family, voted Labour, almost as muscle memory. Was a family that was strong Welsh identifiers, but independence didn't factor into their minds or thoughts around politics at all. My interest in the started at uni through my studies, the people that I spent time with, through the trips that we took to Parliament and the Senedd, and subsequently then the work experience that I had in Westminster and the Senedd. And very quickly, though, anecdotally, for me, it became very clear that Wales was an afterthought in Westminster, and that I think was even more reinforced by the then Welsh Secretary Stephen Crabb saying himself that Wales is an afterthought in Whitehall. And I think actually, that's why, for example, Tryweryn is an important symbol to a lot of us here. There we have an example of a drowning of a Welsh village where every Welsh MP voted against it, but it happened anyway. I think it encapsulates a lot of the stuff that we talk about here in the independence movement. It allows us to form some of our views on it, but I think actually the challenge for us now is to go further again and to look towards the future. Since then, since my studies, my support for India has only grown, based on the basis that things actually could be a lot better for the community that I call home, the community I grew up in, the community I live in at the moment. It's strengthened even more, I have to be honest, since becoming a member of the Senedd. Debate after debate, question after question, we get the same answer almost every time, and predominantly those answers are two things or both together. Firstly, that there's not enough money. We love to do that, but Westminster doesn't give us enough funding. The second is that we should wait for the Labour government in Westminster and then everything will be better. We'll reach nirvana, or maybe a more appropriate term would be utopia. Clearly, I'm not convinced, otherwise I wouldn't be arguing for independence. The questions that come to mind then is, why should we always wait for a better government when the need actually is now for people in Wales? Why should Wales have to put up with a government that they never voted for in a century or more? I think these are important questions for us to ask. So how do we go about convincing people of independence? Well, I think we start actually with where we are at now, and then create a better vision for the future that we want to see. After all, if that's not why we're supporters of independence, then we may as well just stick to the status quo. Research from Barnardo's, where parents were surveyed, half of those parents expressed concerns about keeping their children warm. 23% said it was a battle to put food on the table every day. And the Bevan Foundation snapshot of poverty in winter in 2023 had similarities. It also raised that many were going without essentials. Over half of disabled people going without heating, and debt piling up. And I think that's been crystallised in the industrial action that we've seen over the last year and a half. Now, very clearly, the system and this economy doesn't work for the many. And I always say, you strip back that rhetoric, you strip back the jargon, and what is the economy actually about? Well, it's about people. It's about what people do, it's their actions, it's how happy they are, it's what they're spending their money on. And there, I think, lies what we need to address, and how do we create an independent Wales that actually works for people. One where poverty is a painful but distant memory that our kids and grandkids only read about. And that has to be the core of our offer. It's also, I think, one of our biggest challenges as well to answer. We have to essentially reverse the flow of an economy that has been largely extractive. We need to build community wealth. We need to build confidence in our communities. We have a situation where the Crown Estates, for example, will ultimately control and benefit from our natural resources. We have a situation where 40% of our expenditure is decided by Westminster with no guarantee that it will actually align to what the needs of our country is. So those are just some of the economic questions we'll have to answer, and I emphasise the word some there. Our challenges are going to be numerous. We have big questions to answer, but we also have what might feel like somewhat trivial questions to answer, but are important to people. And I think there's lessons to learn from Scotland, and I wonder how many bets were on out there in terms of how long it would take for us to talk about Scotland. But there are lessons to learn, and I would actually caveat that with that, it's difficult to make direct comparisons between Wales and Scotland on many levels because there's a different history. We started devolution at different places, but where I think there are lessons to learn is in their referendum experience. So I'm sure that a lot of people remember the document, Scotland's Future, Your Guide to Independence, which was produced by the Scottish Government. Now, there was about 650 to 700 pages on what independence meant, but ultimately there were some key issues that the Yes campaign struggled to get over, and that's where I think the similarities would be. It's around the future of the BBC, it's around the monarchy, it's around pensions, it's around currency. We have to talk about what people care about. Things people in Pencoed, for example, care about. We can't expect people to take a leap of faith. We're talking about their futures, we're talking about the future of generations yet to come. And the reality is they won't come with us if we don't have those answers. These conversations are going to happen regardless. So let's make sure that we have the answers, or as best as we can, because as Will said, there's some that we just simply don't know. But also, let's ensure that we frame the debate in a way that we want it to be framed as well, about a positive future for our country rather than a negative one that we are often subject to. I'll leave my remarks there. I think I'm close to the 10 minutes now, but I am looking forward to the conversation tonight. I will say, to be fair to Tom and Hedin, they've probably come to what they thought was a hostile crowd, but I don't think we should be afraid of some of the questions that they ask, because ultimately these are going to be the questions that are going to be raised on the doorstep when we go out to campaign for an independent Wales. So, diolch yn fawr. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Luke. As he says, two gentlemen on my right are probably more reflective of the overall views of people in Wales when it comes to independence than people in this room are. They're the sort of people who need to be convinced. That's conversations that need to be had. Good points, Luke. Christine?
Well, I'm with the mic here. I'm going to be the only person here, I think, who's going to do a PowerPoint presentation, but this is my answer to that. These three erudite gentlemen are more used to speaking in public, and I am certainly not a public speaker, so I have got to put my thoughts on something that I can reference to. So this is my presentation. So basically, I hope the technology works. So my name is Christine Moore, and I'm actually a director of YesCymru. Can you hear me? I mean, the mic, great stuff. So I've got a little note here today saying to myself, read slowly. So there you are, that's a note to myself. So I'm obviously here to advocate for an independent Wales. And I'm framing my argument really within the sort of past, present and future. So I'm not coming from this from a sort of political angle. I'm just giving you a sense of why I personally believe in an independent Wales. So there you are, there's my thumbs up. Independent Wales. So the past. Right, this is me at 3. So I was a grumpy person then, and I'm still a grumpy person, a lot of people will say, but it's me at 3. And this is at my grandparents' house in Pencoed. So for those who don't know, that's a council estate just opposite the Princess of Wales Hospital, where I lived with my grandparents and my parents. And my grandfather used to tie a rope around my waist because I was a terrible wanderer. And they used to tie me to the swing to sort of stop me climbing through the hedge. Anyway, I did on one occasion wander off, and I was found picking daisies in Coity Castle. And I was found by the milkman, who recognised me as being one of the frost girls from Pencoed, and he brought me back on his milk float. So little did I know that 60 years later I'd be clambering over the ramparts of Coity Castle. Please don't tell Cadw this, okay? Totally unaware of who had walked in my footsteps some 800 years before. So the siege of Coity I'm referring to, and I'm referring to the siege of Coity by EnglandandWales 1404 and 1405. So notably he was Crown Prince of Wales in 1404. So you see, I walked at 3 in the footsteps of one of Wales's most important historical figures. I couldn't not mention him in this presentation. And I was blissfully unaware of this at 3, and probably nearer till 33 did I realise his significance. And why would I? I was not taught my history at school. The sharp-eyed ones amongst you will actually recognise this. This is Ogmore Castle, sorry. So, and here we are, YesCymru Penybont, are all flying the flags on EnglandandWales Day. So why does the past matter? This is a quote from Machiavelli, so I'd never thought I'd get Machiavelli and EnglandandWales in the same slides, but there you go. Whoever wishes to foresee the future must consult the past, for human events ever resemble those of preceding times. This arises from the fact that they are produced by men who ever have been and ever shall be animated by the same passions, and thus they necessarily have the same results. This is a perspective by the historian John Jeffries Martin, an American historian, and he writes in the Washington Post in 2019, "Why study history? Because it can save us from democratic collapse," he argues. How can we fight current threats to democracy? He argues that studying history identifies institutions that protect democratic systems. So the importance of learning about Owain Glyndŵr for me is not to lord over fancy irrelevant titles, but to learn about his vision of a Wales built on the premise of strong institutions. He details his vision of a Wales in the penal letter to the King of France in 1406, and that principle remains today, albeit we have advanced our thinking since the 15th century. So peace, justice and strong institutions, says the United Nations. So I'm going to jump now from the past to the present, and sort of moving away from institutions, more installations. This is the view from my gate at home, and it's the Upper Ogmore wind farm. This is a view of a smart meter, and a year ago, emergency credit on a repayment meter was £5. I don't know if you can see that the emergency credit for the electricity on here stands at £25 each. The electricity deficit showing here is minus £26.11. So to pay off the emergency credit, you have to put in £30 just to get £3.88 worth of electricity. There is such a disconnect between the huge amounts of profits made by energy producers and the reality of the cost of living crisis on the ground for ordinary folk. Folk who live in the shadow of these whirly-birds, as I call them, ironically casting a shadow over the site of the old Wyndham Colliery. Oh, the wind of change. This is Llynby Afon Wind Farm, Mynydd y Gelli, Abergwynfi, owned by Glen Environmental Infrastructure Fund, with a net asset value in 2022 of £814 million, and its office is in Guernsey. The wind farm produces energy for 17,000 houses. Gwynfi has a population of 1,362 people. And according to the Index of Multiple Deprivation, the Avon Valley contains some of the most deprived communities in Neath and Port Talbot. In fact, in the top 25% of the most deprived wards in Wales. One of the key drivers of poverty are high living costs, especially housing costs, says the Rowntree Foundation. You see, disconnect, no benefit. We know in Wales we produce twice as much electricity as we use, and we have some of the highest electricity prices in the UK. And we don't directly benefit from any tax revenue. Energy is a reserved matter mainly, which means strategic decisions and regulatory responsibilities relating to energy issues such as security, affordability and market fairness are made at the UK level. But we have entrenched poverty here in Wales. We have 200,000 people living in relative income poverty, people who earn less than 60% of the UK average wage. Welsh Government aim of ending child poverty by 2020 was always ambitious, says the Rowntree Foundation, thwarted by the UK Government and their control of key drivers of poverty. So ambition is not enough. Wales faces urgent challenges. We do not have the fiscal firepower here in Wales, says the Institute of Welsh Affairs. And Professor John Doyle's report on the fiscal deficit in Wales quotes, approximately 2/3 of the current fiscal gap is related to lower tax revenues due to lower incomes combined with higher levels of poverty in Wales. Therefore, higher expenditure on social benefits. We know that tax benefits are current policies set by Westminster, and he is basically saying in his report that fiscal deficits are also a product of decisions on taxation. Get all me words mixed up there, I do apologise. We know we produce and consume goods and services, and we know we pay tax here in Wales. So we do have an economy here in Wales. Our GDP is 75 billion. But we have no control on the production, supply and distribution of money, and no control of tax. This is the fiscal firepower the Institute of Welsh Affairs refers to. We have the resources, we have the workforce, we have a wide range of industries, and I've listed some there. So I'm jumping to the future. I believe there is no conceivable reason why Wales could not be independent. The UK's written constitution takes for granted the unfettered sovereignty of Westminster. The status quo is not a reliable or sustainable basis for the governance of Wales in the future, says the Independent Commission on the Constitutional Future of Wales. We need the institutions and the levers that make good governance possible here in Wales. Government that has the responsibility and the accountability. Becoming an independent nation gives Wales the opportunity to write a written constitution. Sorry? Oh, sorry, yeah, I'll speak quickly. Small countries can have a better fundamental rights. Oh, somebody's messaging me, go away. Please. Small countries can have better fundamental rights, open government, better access to civil justice and effective criminal justice. Small countries can have strong economies. So to quote the words of my namesake, Christine Lagarde, President of the European Central Bank since 2019, countries with strong legal and institutional frameworks perform better in terms of sustainable growth and human development. So it is very clear to me that until Wales has control over its own strong institutions, we will never achieve the sustainable economic growth and human development we so desperately need here in Wales. So to sum up, we need to govern ourselves, we need to make our own laws, we need a written constitution, and we need to work as equal with other countries. This is independence, and independence is quite normal. Diolch yn fawr.
Christine, I think you might have misled us when you said you couldn't publicly speak. We actually gave you an extra 30 seconds then, because you're the only one involved to make a presentation. You also achieved 1 out of 3 in the Indie Wales bingo, in mentioning Owain Glyndwr. Normally you also get Margaret Thatcher and Boris Johnson, so we'll see if those two also come up. Well done. I've nearly got my line. Interestingly, with the fiscal deficit, Scotland and Wales both have a fiscal deficit, as in we can debate how those sums are coming to, but let's not do that now. But what's interesting is Wales has a deficit not because it spends more like Scotland does, but actually because it generates less income, whereas Scotland earns like the UK, but spends like it's Norway, whereas Wales tends to spend like the UK and earns like it's Portugal. We can go into more detail later, but just a bit of background on the challenges and the opportunities that are there. So next up we've got Labour MS Heffin. Oh, is it?
No, it's me.
Tom. I'm so sorry. Tom, are you going up, Tom? I'll okay.
Thank you everybody for coming here tonight. It'd be good to be on the drive down that perhaps I'm the first Tory politician to have spoken at the YesCymru event. So very, very much looking forward to it. And I'm genuinely looking forward to it because, as Will said, as the discussion around an independent Wales becomes more prominent, and perhaps it isn't becoming better supported, and that's perhaps a theme we can return to, but as the discussion becomes more and more prominent in our daily discourse here in Wales, it's important that we discuss and debate the issues that might arise, as they've alluded to, the benefits of staying in the Union, and perhaps the benefits of a potential independent Wales. And the first thing that I wanted to say, and it may shock you, is that I don't think Wales couldn't be independent. I think it shouldn't be independent. And that's the key difference, because there are a number of arguments that we could go through, and I'll touch on some of them. First of all, as we've alluded to, and I share the concern, I guess, that I heard from Christine in particular about things like child poverty, which are really, really important. But we know that unless we've got a strong economy that's able to deal with able to benefit from sort of the production that we generate here in Wales, able to fund public services in the way that will genuinely transformationally change people's lives. The system that we've got currently is not perfect, and I'll come back to why it's not perfect later on. But the UK has the 5th largest GDP in the world, and independent Wales would have the 44th, somewhere akin to Slovakia. And that far consequential means that we can cash in on that. We can spend in Wales at a rate of £1.20 for every pound that's being spent in England. And what that means is that we can punch, as Will said, kind of above our weight, if you like, in terms of the amount that we are able to spend in Wales. That's the beauty of being in the union. Secondly, I think there's an issue around what an independent Wales will do in terms of its debt, as we alluded to. Start off with its currency. It's highly likely that Wales might have to join the euro if it left the United Kingdom. That's perfectly possible. Now, Wales has a debt to GDP ratio under an independent Wales that would be higher than the EU rules would allow. But what would that mean in reality? That would mean austerity, that would mean cuts, that would mean having to cut back even further. And what that means in turn is we are less able to deal with some of the challenges that we and Christine rightly put out at the beginning. And thirdly, it's things like pension debt, I won't go into the specifics, but things like pension debt, what we do with trading in the rest of the UK. If, for example, we've got England would be outside of the European Union and Wales would be inside of the European Union. How would we have a border? We've seen the trouble that we've had in between the Republic and Northern Ireland in dealing with that. But it's not just economic, historic and cultural ties with the rest of the UK. Things like defence and cyber security. We pull out of those UK-wide agreements, it leaves us more open to, potentially more open to bad actors that look to capitalise on that front. And things like law enforcement as well. Things like county line drug operations, for example, that will exist along our border that are being dealt with on a UK-wide basis now. So people ask the question from the independent side is, do we even need an army? Do we even need defence in an independent Wales? I would absolutely argue that we do. I think it would be reductive to say that independent Wales shouldn't play its part in the world. Humanitarian operations, more often than not, is what our military deals with in the modern age. And actually, I haven't seen a good answer as to how we'll have a genuine cohesive defence unit either. What I think we've got in the current structure is we've got the best of both worlds. We've got a Senate that absolutely, I don't agree with the political makeup of the Senate, of course I don't. But we've got a Senate with the power that's elected by the people of Wales to take decisions on the issues that matter to the people of Wales. If we went out and knocked doors now, as I often do, and I know my colleagues here do as well, one of the issues that are coming to the doorsteps is health, it's education, it's climate change. All these battles are more often than not devolved to Wales, and those decisions can be taken in Wales. We've also got a unity government, as I said earlier, that can provide firepower to deliver on other matters. But we've also got a unity government that provides a check and a balance to what the Welsh government can do. And the best example I give on that is Brexit. And now, I honestly believe that if Brexit had been a responsibility of the Welsh government and been a responsibility of the Senate, it would never have happened. That's despite Wales voting for it. But you can applaud, but you're ignoring the views of the people of Wales. People of Wales voted in their droves for Brexit. And in reality, it would never ever have happened in Wales because it didn't have a set of politicians there willing to enact it. And we've seen the debates that happened in the previous Senate on those issues. And we've also got the best of both worlds in a number of other fields as well. I know, for example, there are a number of people who would be aghast at the idea of Swansea City being pulled up the English pyramid, for example, if Wales were to leave the United Kingdom as well. However, what I'd say in the instance of fairness is this. I think Luke was right to say that there are genuine and legitimate questions about how Wales would look if it were to be independent. I don't think all those questions have been answered. And so in the interest of fairness, I think there are a number of things that don't work in the current structure of the United Kingdom. And I think they are entirely reasonable things. I'm not here to say that the current structure is perfect. I'm not here to say that everything works in the current setup of the United Kingdom. Because I think there are a number of issues really. I think if we designed devolution today, it probably wouldn't look across the United Kingdom in the way it does. I think we've got a bit of a mess of devolution, frankly, across the UK. We've got parliaments in some areas, we've got first ministers and parliament. In other areas, we've got metro mayors, we've got super councils, we've got kids and crime commissioners, devolved growth deals, and so on. It is a genuine mess. And I think if you were designing devolution today, you wouldn't design it in the way that you have. Secondly, I think you've got a Welsh government that kind of lives on easy street a little bit, because it doesn't generate the money that it needs to fund the public services that it wants. And we can have an argument about whether taxation powers should be devolved or whether there's another way of achieving that. But frankly, we've got a government that spends money and calls for more money to be spent, but actually doesn't really generate the money in the first place. So, are we talking about, we've heard a number of calls from both Welsh Government and from Plaid Cymru in terms of, we need more money from Westminster for this and that, and Liv alluded to it as well. Well, in an independent Wales, we have to generate that money ourselves somehow. So would that be increasing taxes? Would that be larger scale borrowing? And I don't think that the current structure allows for genuine democratic government to operate in the way that perhaps it should. And a system of spending and a system of taxation. And finally, and I know Will is here, I don't think we have the press we probably deserve to have in Wales, because a lot of our press is UK-based, so I don't think we have a government, we don't have a press that looks at government here in Wales enough. I don't think we have a press that looks at communities in Wales enough. It's not just about what's happening in Cardiff, what's happening here in Bridgend and in other counties across the world. I think we're badly served by a press atmosphere here in Wales. I don't know what all the answers are to solve those things, frankly, but I think that they're legitimate arguments to put out there on the table. But finally, Will started by saying independence depends, your attitude to independence may depend on your attitude to risk, and I think that's entirely right. Knowing what we know about independence, and a number of the arguments that have been set out and a number of the arguments you've heard elsewhere, why would we decide to proceed with independence? I think, going back to Brexit, one of the issues that we saw was that, was that Brexit was somehow being blamed on the votes of a number of English retirees living in somewhere like Pembrokeshire. I think that's a reductive argument. And it's certainly not that. The highest proportion of votes for Brexit were in Blaenau. Now, there are very, very few people retiring from England living in Blaenau. But in addition to that, I think it's a reductive argument, because who are we to decide who is Welsh and who is not? From my view, if you live in Wales, if you're proud to be Welsh, even if you don't live in Wales but love this country, you are Welsh and you're Welsh in mind. Secondly, I think that it is too often I see the argument behind independence being related on national pride. I know it, rather, being related on the idea of how proud you are to be Welsh. And I think that's a reductive argument, because you can be both proud to be Welsh and to be British. That is entirely normal, and it is where the people of Wales are. What we shouldn't be doing is pitting one identity against the other. You can love our language and love the monarchy, support Wales and cheer on Team GB. And most importantly, be proud to be Welsh and proud to be British.
Thank you very much, Tom. I think there was actually a couple of things in there, buried in. I could see some people in the audience vigorously shaking heads, some ferocious nodding as well. There was some things we agreed on. I think most people in here would agree that the UK as currently constituted isn't as rational as it could be. Whether you support the Union, whether you support independence, I think you would say it doesn't necessarily work as it is right now. And actually, YesCymru's definition of someone being to be Welsh is to live in Wales. If you've chosen to make Wales your home, you are Welsh. So that's another thing we all agree on. I think it was Grimble Evans who said that anyone can be Welsh, they just have to be willing to accept the consequences, which is fair enough. I will go on to Evan. I'll just say on those pensions, I think this is an important thing, isn't it, pensions? There's an argument that lots of the Scottish debate was lost on issues like currency and pensions. I mean, if we want to discuss pensions in depth, does Wales take every pensioner who lives here? I mean, Plaid Cymru in a recent paper said, actually, no, we didn't. They built up their pension with the UK government. That debt is with the UK government. But then you have a government from outside of Wales paying the pensions of your most vulnerable. Is that a good situation? How do you divide up? There's lots of ways that you can go about it. I'm just making a point that this is inherently very, very complicated, and that's something that we can get into, and I can see some people are itching to do so, so we will. Let's go over to Hep and David now for his 10 minutes. I think he's going to the podium. No presentation, am I right?
No presentation, no.
Christine.
But I did. Can everybody hear me at the back? Yeah, okay, great. I did want to, I'm just going to move that back a minute.
Do you want to move the laptop?
No, I'll use it actually, as long as it doesn't fall off the thing. Yeah, okay. I wanted to stand up because partly you get a very sore bum from sitting down the whole time, but also the fact I think I prefer to speak standing up. So there were fives and there were ones in the room, and most of the room I think we can agree was ones at the beginning, but a fair number of fives as well, with not many in between, a couple in between. Well, I'll call myself between 2 and 4 from the beginning. I'm somewhere between 2 and 4. I'm certainly not a 5. Perhaps Tom isn't a 5 either from some of the things he said. He's a 4, there we are. And certainly Luke and Christine are ones there. I feel that the passion behind calls for Welsh independence are really quite impressive. Sometimes they spill over a little bit on Twitter, but that's another story. But I do see the passion in people's eyes, and I don't want to denigrate that in any way today. What I want to do is talk to those people who are either ones or fives, and put my perspective as someone you perhaps need to persuade either way. And I'm unpersuaded, and I'll tell you something, attacking me on Twitter doesn't persuade me, and it puts a lot of people off as well. So that's the other thing I should mention at this point. One of the things that concerns me is when you look in a politician's eyes and you see certainty. So you look in their eyes and you see absolute certainty. And it's different to conviction. Certainty is when you absolutely believe, against any other evidence available, that yours is the right path. And that concerns me. I'm not someone you would say is a certain politician. And I'd like to just highlight where historically certainty's brought us. Certainty brought us Margaret Thatcher, the miners' strike and how she addressed that. I remember one of the reasons I'm a Labour politician is my father was a county councillor, was a councillor during the district council actually, during the miners' strike. We had to take food round. I was lucky, he was a head teacher. We had to take packages of food round to people who lived in my community because their parents were on strike and had no income. That led from certainty. Privatisation, the privatisation and the selling off of the silver in the 1980s was from a place of certainty. The decimation, Luke, of the trade unions that your father suffered was as a result of certainty. And later, the disaster of the poll tax and Margaret Thatcher's relationship with the European Union. But you could also say the Iraq War was a result of certainty, something that I find difficult to comprehend, particularly the aftermath. The aftermath was not prepared for because of the certainty in which they went into. Austerity was because of certainty. And austerity is, we're paying the price today for the austerity of the 2010 government. The reason the NHS is struggling quite so much as it is because of the austerity programme that we saw from 2010. Now, the reason they brought in austerity, because they were certain that you had to address these things during a downturn, that you had to cut during a downturn. But actually, it was the best time to spend. Interest rates were historically low, yet the government refused to adopt what is simple, not Marxist, but Keynesianist economics. Refused to do so because of certainty, because of that hangover of Thatcher. And Brexit was because of certainty. The Leave campaign, we will give you certainty. If we leave, we'll take back control. And I would say as well, Tom, I don't think you were a Liz Truss supporter, but her entire premiership was based on certainty and an unwillingness to listen to the reality. And I think you know what I'm going to say. I fear that if you are a one, then you have also that certainty in Welsh independence. Now, you would probably say to me, no, I am certain, but this time I'm right about this one. Everybody else was wrong. But that is that certainty, a true belief in you are right. Now, I don't feel that independence would necessarily be a disaster or a bad thing, picking up where Tom said. But I am not certain, and I think there will be a whole degree of unintended consequences. There's a group in the Labour Party called Labour for Independent Wales. I understand they've split off a bit from YesCymru now, I think. There was a bit of a political thing going on, I don't know. Only what I'm gathering from what I'm reading on Twitter, I don't know. But I know that one of the reasons they back an independent Wales is because they see the Welsh public as inherently more left-wing or more socialist than the English public. And I fundamentally disagree. I think under a proportional system, and if you had a proportional system in England, you could see an independent Wales with a Conservative-led government and an independent England with a Labour-led government under a proportional system. It's entirely possible. So, I mean, it's fine if you're a YesCymru Conservative. You don't need to worry. If you're Tom, it might even persuade him. But I think it's possible. I think it is possible and it could happen. There's also, you're turning down the opportunity from a socialist perspective of progressive income redistribution. There's a barrel load of wealth in the southeast of England. The European Union was partly the body that helped redistribute that through our membership. It's probably why so many Conservatives hated it. Levelling Up doesn't do that. The Shared Prosperity Fund doesn't do that. We've already heard Rishi Sunak talking about how he wants to level up Royal Tunbridge Wells. That doesn't happen at the moment, and you do need a Labour government to do that. But if you go to an independent Wales, you are turning down the opportunity to have that kind of radical redistribution. And I do think an independent Wales, I think Tom is right. There was a huge vote in Wales to leave the EU. I've come from that community. I had £1 million from the European Union to rebuild a car park next to a village in my council ward in order to take parking off the streets and into the car park. It was the biggest issue in the village. When I knocked doors during the referendum, I said, don't forget, we got £1 million of European money to build that car park and get those cars off your streets. Yeah, they said, but there's bigger issues. I'm voting Brexit. There was a huge upswell there. So what happens if you're wrong? And I think that is my issue with this certainty around Welsh independence. What happens if you're wrong and there are other options available to us still? We need to relate our decisions to current and future context. But proportional representation for me would be the key game changer across the United Kingdom. So introducing a voting system of proportional representation means you couldn't have Conservative governments on 43% of the vote governing in the UK. They would have to find an accommodation with other parties. Labour itself would have to find accommodation with other parties through a proportional system. I think it's exactly the right way to go. It is, after all, how we do it in Wales, and we are moving to a more proportional system for the Senedd next time with the cooperation between Plaid Cymru and Labour. I think it's absolutely the right thing to do. And I think a proportional system will bring about a kind of government that will be different, a UK government that will be different to any that has gone before. And I think that will make a huge difference and will negate the need to leap to this independent with all these uncertainties. And I want to talk about public appetite and referendums as well. I'm not in favour of referendums. I wasn't in favour of a referendum to set up the Welsh Assembly in 1997. I don't think you needed to. Labour had a huge majority, and if you added the Liberal Democrats and Plaid Cymru onto that, there was clearly public appetite. You don't need a referendum on Welsh independence either, in my view. You need to have parties in a proportional system with the courage of their convictions. So Plaid Cymru can stand and say, if you vote for us and we form the government, we will legislate in the first term for independence, and in the second term, if we are re-elected, we will enact it. And I think that is a way in which parties will have to put their money where their mouth is. Now, my view is, I don't think the SNP would have done as well in Scotland if that was the case, and if a referendum was always off the table, and I don't think Plaid Cymru would do so well if they were. But But if the mood was to change, then the electoral arithmetic changes, and they may be in a place to do it, but they'd have to do it over 2 terms and win 2 elections to do it. I think that is where a written constitution would be very helpful indeed. So, to summarise, no constitution is static and unchanging. We can have a written constitution in the UK. Development, yes, it's piecemeal, and it isn't very inspiring to go out there and say, well, maybe. It's not an inspiring election slogan, but I think we have to work in the reality of the world we are in. So, YesCymru, they've got the tunes. Yes, yes is such a positive word. Yes, yes to more prosperity. Yes to a better economy. Yes to a better health service. Yes, yes, yes. As Meg Ryan said in When Harry Met Sally. I think it's a good tune, that, yes, and I think Barack Obama did a good job with it as well. But I think we have to have these debates, and this is why I welcome tonight this opportunity, because I think you've opened your doors, you're listening to people who are unpersuaded, and you're listening, more importantly, to why we are unpersuaded and what alternatives we might offer. And finally, just to say, I don't think there is such thing as an independent country. I think every single country of the world is interdependent. And you've just got to choose what your interdependency is. Are you going to have interdependency with the European Union? Are you going to have interdependency with the UK? Or are you going to have both? I think we were doing pretty well for a while back there. And I think leaving the European Union was a mistake that has driven an awful lot of our desire towards Welsh independence. But I would say, let's keep the dialogue going. Let's keep talking to each other. Let's be respectful. And let's just stay off Twitter.
Okay, so in Welsh Independence Bingo, we've done Thatcher now. Just
I did that for you.
I got to admit, Harry Met Sally was not on the bingo ticket, but great stuff. So what we're going to do is we're going to go on to some questions now. So we've got one roving microphone. Is that right? One microphone. Fantastic. We're going to try and get to as many people as possible. Ideally, we're looking for questions, not long drawn-out opinions. Okay. If you find yourself saying more than 3 sentences, you've probably gone too far. Okay. Great stuff. Also, if you'd like to ask a question in Cymraeg, please do, and please forgive my filthy, sice, anglicised tongue for having to have it translated. Okay. Great stuff. Any questions? Yeah. This guy's keen.
Yeah, hi. It was very interesting to hear history being discussed, and especially EnglandandWales history in this part of Wales, which I wasn't aware of, which is excellent. Since the Second World War, of course, we've got to remember more recent history. 51 countries have become independent, sovereign states and left London control. Now, I don't believe many of them had an independence referendum. If you look at India, they certainly didn't. Most of Africa, the Caribbean. It was actually London that let them go. Right? And when you bear that in mind, that in Ulster at the moment, in Northern Ireland, Parliament voted for the Windsor Agreement and are letting the Unionists go de facto, in effect. And I wonder how much of our future is going to be dependent on whether London wants to keep us or not. We mentioned that under the Barnett formula, we get compensated £1.20 for every pound the English get, or the Londoners. Wouldn't it be fair that they get the proper money? Could it be that like India, like these far-flung countries, the 51 countries that left London control, like I say, could it be that one day London just decides, hang on a minute guys, we can be Ireland, Scotland, Wales and England and have that type of relationship?
Okay. Does anyone want to take that? Is a potential consequence Wales becoming independent by default because London decides not to? Anyone want to take it? Well, this is a riveting debate.
I just think I don't know whether there was a question. It was quite a comment, which I think why we were stumped for answering it. But I think a lot of us in Wales wouldn't really compare ourselves to the countries that you talked about. I'm certain people in this room would. But as Luke said earlier, out there, I think, we do talk about ourselves as British, and even if Wales was independent, would you want to form some kind of confederal union with England, to gain the benefits that you could still gain and still call yourself British, in the same way many of us still call ourselves European? There's the opportunity there. I just feel that is perhaps not the comparison that I would make, because the majority of people don't think of themselves in the same way. But I do agree with you about the referendum.
What about Northern Ireland? The concept of Northern Ireland?
So, and the other issue is I'm very much an SDLP supporter, and I would like to see a united Ireland by consent, because that is an island. It's an island state with joint sovereignty. I think it doesn't make sense to have that country split up, but it has to be by consent of the people.
Christine, did you see anything?
I just wanted, I wanted to mirror what Helen said. I couldn't quite pick out what the actual question there was, but just to sort of say on your first point, will Westminster let Wales go? I think I have a simple answer to that. No, I don't think they would. And I also wanted to pick out something you said about this £1.20 to the £1. I mean, I wrote a quote down, from Lord Barnett, and he said something to the effect of distribution of UK revenue to the regions and nations of UK is based on a hodgepodge of badly designed formula. So I do think this idea of £1.20 Wales gets for is not accurate. And I want to also pick up on the point of Britishness. And of course, history, you mentioned history, and of course the notion of Britain is a very ancient, the island of Britain is a very old concept. But the notion of Britishness is quite a modern post-war, you mentioned there. And I have no problem identifying as being British if I used Gwynfor Evans's quote, if Britishness wasn't equated with Englishness. Now, that's not to say I'm not British, but I'm just saying that Britain as a concept is much older than the notion of the UK as a union. Do you get my understanding?
I suppose from a YesCymru's perspective, if you're going to win a majority of people wanting support, you're going to have to convince people who identify as British to support independent Wales, or to change their identity. So, hands up. Any other questions? Let's go over to Wondershare. I feel very mean saying that. I respect everybody. Sorry.
It's all right. No, proud member of BRIDGEND, thank you. So my name's Councillor Jonathan Pratt, represent Newton, BCBC, the one and only Conservative there. But we hopefully have better success in the next local elections. I watched your slideshow up above, and I was interested in the view that we pay twice as much defence through taxation than the Republic of Ireland. And I always enjoy when I see statements like that, because I always go to the lies, damn lies and statistics. If you look at the comparable air forces from each country, the Republic of Ireland have a personnel force of 752. The Royal Air Force has a defence personnel of 37,000. So paying twice as much tax than Republic of Ireland, with a 30 times personnel quantity than Britain, I'd argue that's probably not bad spending. But I think the argument that YesCymru is having is whether we want a military or not. Now, this is, I was involved in the Brexit debate quite heavily. There will be a question. People in the audience can also be respectful of other people. Sorry, it's not an
sorry, sir, 1 second. If people in the audience can be respectful of people asking, that's okay. We're going to come to you. We're going to come to you.
For the next election.
No worries, that's fine, no problem, no worries. I'm just wondering, we went through the Brexit debate, the referendum itself. So my question to the panel would be, what lessons have both Unionists and Nationalists learned from that debate, and what would Wales look like politically, particularly their parties, if independence was successful? Thank you.
Good question. Luke, what have you learned from the Brexit debate?
Well, I think actually it comes back to what I did say around uncertainty. I think we have to be honest with people doing any sort of referendum around independence or the European Union. there is uncertainty, and we would be dealing with something very complex. We've talked about, for example, some of the work done by John Doyle on the pensions. There's a lot to say around what the whole pension argument would entail. There's no certainty in anything we talk about. So honesty, I think, is the best thing. I think, again, it's about creating a positive vision for what we want to achieve. Doing our best to set out how we get there, but also remembering that you can't guarantee anything in the world that is ever changing. And I actually, the points that Heather made around uncertainty, I think are really important.
Tom? So, going back to the question, I think there were two questions in there. First of all, was about defence, and I think that's something that I raised. And this is a genuinely fair question, I think, to ask: how does Wales defend itself, both at home and abroad? I guess in an independent structure, would we still have some kind of agreement, whether it be within the British state, whatever that would look like, or would we have some kind of pan-European arrangement, or would we decide to kind of go it alone, I guess? That, I think, is a question that sort of remains lingering. I'm genuinely interested if anybody on the YesCymru panel or in the audience can answer that. I think the second point was about political balance in a post-independent Wales, and I think the point Kevin made was right, is that if we look at Welsh independence as a vehicle to achieve left-wing politics, I think you will be disappointed perhaps with the result. Because, we spoke about Brexit, I won't return to it, but obviously, I can tell from my mention of Brexit there wasn't support in this room for it, but there is support there on this room for it. So Wales won't always vote the way that you want to do that, and as long as we can accept that an independent Wales will also have governments you don't like, just in the way that the UK does, will probably be give themselves a fairer picture of what an independent Wales probably look like.
Steve, have there anything you want to add?
I just wanted, defence. I mean, I didn't mention defence, by the way, it was Tom. But I just noted, in terms of our defence, what we pay for defence now under the GERA, which is our expenditure and revenue, which is accounted to Wales, we actually pay as part of that £2 billion already for defence out of the GERA. That's what we pay. So I think what I would say is, look, lots of small countries make differing decisions about the defence that they have. Ireland, as a share of their GDP, actually is a very small percentage, and they have a very small defence mechanism. So it is for the people of Wales in an independent, Wales to decide what military capability it requires. So I don't think it's to say that Wales couldn't have a defence. We also are sharing an island with England and Scotland, and we also have Ireland on the island next door. So I see no reason why we couldn't have a defence mechanism. We wouldn't have some form of defence, and I don't see any reason why then we would not work with our partners, including Europe, in terms of that, our capacity in that way.
Welcome to Heather. I would say on defence spending, one of the hardest things about allocating it is that Wales gets, when they draw this budgets of what Wales spends, it gets a proportion part of the defence budget. But obviously, it doesn't mean that much of a defence budget is spent in Wales, so it is a really hard thing to quantify. Kevin, is there anything you wanted to add?
Well, the last thing that Christine said regarding a kind of common defence policy, I think that's ultimately where you end up with confederalism. Confederalism is not beyond the realms of possibility in a future, provided you can get proportional representation.
Can you just describe confederalism?
So you delegate almost everything to the principle of subsidiarity to the nations of the UK. I would prefer to see England broken up into regions, actually, because I think actually that's more a realistic structure of England. But nonetheless, in an independent system, it wouldn't be your business to do it. You'd have Wales having responsibility for the majority of those things that are currently in Westminster. But there's a common then defence policy, perhaps a common pensions policy, a common foreign policy, and that is under the umbrella of the UK Union. I've spoken to Ben Lake. I don't know if you're related to him, Steve. No.
Not that I know of.
No, okay. But I spoke to Ben Lake, Plaid Cymru MP, and we've had some constructive conversations in that regard. I think it's somewhere you could end up. It's not my preference right now. I think there's still other options before you get to that point. But it could be somewhere you end up. And I think it's easier to achieve that without a referendum as well. I think the dangers of referendum is that there's the other side who will always say to the losers, shut up, you lost. Those were words that were used in the Senate by Mark Reckless to Annie Davis during the Senate debate. You lost. And that is worrying because, 49.9% of the population could vote the other way, and they're effectively disenfranchised. Real danger. And I'm concerned about that as an unintended consequence.
Christine, do you want to briefly come up?
Yeah, I mean, when I talked about working in partnership in defence, I don't mean the confederal model because, of course, we would always be out-dominated by England so confederalism is not an option for me here. I'm talking about generally working with other countries. You mentioned internationalism, of course, internationalism needs nations to work together with other people. So, that's what I'm talking about. I'm not referring to confederalism or federalism.
We're going to go to the gentleman at the back. I would dearly love not to go to a gentleman anywhere for the next few questions.
It's not the point I intend to make, which I will hopefully later, but it's just...
Sorry, buddy, could you just speak up a little bit?
Yes, certainly. It's not my main point the evening, but just following on something that Hefin and Tom just said now. And I'd like to clarify something you've both mentioned at different times tonight, that in the new Wales, in the new independent Wales, we may well end up with a government that lots of us here don't want. And absolutely, that's democracy. But at least we'll end up with a government that our nation has voted for, which we've never had.
Can I respond to that?
Yeah, you can respond.
Just to respond to that, that's why we need proportional representation across the UK. Because that's absolutely right. The proportional representation would solve that.
But we're never likely to get it.
Okay. Let's you don't have to run up another set. We'll go to the gentleman in the waistcoat, please. The gentleman there in the waistcoat, please.
Testing. So start with the question. Will the Welsh front rise or fall against the pound following independence? And it should be observed in this context that certainly in terms of goods, Wales is a net exporter of goods to the EU and a net exporter of goods to the world. And we actually have substantial services. We have a very large university sector, for example. So our services exports, modes 1 through to 4, are not negligible either. So will a Welsh front rise or fall?
So, question around currency. Ultimately, we can debate this, and I'm sure they'll be shaking their heads. There's three options of currency for an independent Wales. You keep the pound, you don't necessarily have control over interest rates and key levers of your economy. You create your own economy, your own currency, called the punt was what you're referring to. You either then float that or you peg it to another currency, which is inherently complicated. We can go into those details. Or you adopt a currency from another country. Most likely would be the euro. If you were doing it based on who you trade with the most, you'd actually keep the pound, but that would create its own issues. So anyone on the panel want to talk about currency, what that would likely mean in independent Wales, the challenges, the advantages? Anyone want to go there?
Currency was one of those very complicated issues, and I was talking about the need to sort of explore more. And I think as well it's about framing the debate actually about, instead of the sort of costs around independence. I think an important point that we need to start talking about is, well, we've had legal waters in Welsh government saying that we've done everything with the economy, we've thrown the economy on cost. And with respect to the Welsh government, with the powers that we have right now, it does seem that way. So the question I think we should actually be asking is around, well, what happens, what if the actual situation we have is that we can't grow the Welsh economy, we can't do any more with the Welsh economy unless we have full levels of economic powers at the disposal of an independent country. I know Tom picked up on austerity. We know that austerity was a political choice. This was discussed by the UN. there are plenty of other options in terms of when we're dealing with the economy. It's not simply about whether you can, it's simply about whether or not you're bringing in enough money to pay for things. I mean, if governments work like a household budget, then we shouldn't be having anything really of benefit, like the NHS. It's far more complicated than just saying that. I think borrowing is something that we need to seriously consider now, not just as an independent, because we don't have a power over borrowing. So I think actually it's about actually framing this argument about what happens if we can't grow the Welsh economy without those levels. And that's where I keep coming back to.
I'd say if I was an advocate for independence, I think this comes to the heart of some of the internal tensions that might be within the independence movement. And I'd say if it was me, if I was convinced, I'd be arguing to keep the pound until we could join the euro. That would be the most sensible approach that I would suggest if I was an advocate. But again, it's one of those unintended consequences. You can't know what the outcome will be, and it's loaded with risk. And I just think there are easier, more accessible alternatives before you even get to that point.
Can I ask the audience, if you like, what your views would be on what currency you would want?
Should we do another poll? Yeah, let's do another poll. Okay, if there was an independent Wales, I see some of you shuddering like God forbid, but if there was an independent Wales, who would want to keep the pound? Who would want to keep the pound at least initially?
We'd have to keep the pound initially.
Who would like to move to a separate Welsh currency, call it the pund? Now, who would want to peg that to another currency? Who would want that currency to free float? The point I'm trying to make is this is inherently complicated. Who would want to adopt the euro? Okay, that's really interesting because a lot of people who... Okay.
We'd have to have a central bank. It's much more simple than you say, but it's another conversation, detailed topic. But we'd have to form a central bank so we can control.
Well, I think... Well, exactly, but a lot of people who already agree with each other, who are all number one, saying, yeah, we support it, have just voted in different ways. And I think the point I was making about complication is that if an independent Wales, you're going to make that sell to the people of Wales, you need to be able to say, this is what will happen. You can't go into that. I mean, that's one of the issues that Scotland have. You can't go in going, yeah, we might do this, we might try this. People need to know what they're going to be paid in 1 year, 5 years, 10 years. Okay, and that's just a fundamental thing. Okay, question was just going to go to the guy here, the I just realised I actually know. Sorry for calling you excited.
I actually have two questions. Is that problematic?
You cannot. It's not problematic if they're really quick.
Yeah, they are quick. I just wanted to thank Tom and Heffin personally for being here. Obviously, it must be incredibly difficult being in a room with people staring daggers at you, but we really appreciate it anyway. Thank you very much. My first question is to Tom, which is, I would classify myself as a high achiever. You know, I've got a degree in political philosophy, I've got an MBA, I've got a welding qualification, and I'm also doing my HGV license currently. My question to Tom is, how can we justify say that we're putting in, you know, we're taking £1.15 or whatever it is from the UK each time the pound we're actually putting in? How is that a preferential situation to actually filling that bowl ourselves?
Okay, so, do you want to do both questions? Do you want to they're not overlapping questions, are they?
Oh, no, sorry. I was going to ask my other one afterwards.
Okay, well,
or do you want me to ask it now?
Ask both now.
Yeah, okay, no worries. My other question was to Heffin, which was... how would the situation within the Labour Party and the influence of the Welsh how influential would the Welsh Labour Party be if we were to adopt PR in the UK? Because to me, the Welsh Labour Party would still be lacking in influence in comparison to the rest of the Labour Party, and ultimately that wouldn't change things.
Okay, let's go to Tom first then.
Okay, on the point you made about Barnett formula and the amount we get in spending the Welsh government versus the amount spent in England, I think you make a reasonable point. I think that and I spoke about it, I think that there is a disconnect sometimes between the actions that the Welsh government takes. So the best example I can give you is Welsh government has a responsibility for economic development. But there's no financial incentive for the Welsh government in terms of the tax revenue that it raises to promote economic development. there's no incentive for Welsh Government to grow the economy to, well, other than a very small amount, then we'll get back via a parliament contribution. I think that is a very fair point. It's a point that I've raised earlier on in terms of perhaps some of the flaws here. What that model looks like, where we can both have a system where we are in control, if you like, of the amount of money raised through economic development here in Wales and sort of see the fruits of that, but also have a system where we are, rightly as other people have raised, recompensed, if you like, for key statistics like age and level of poverty and so on. I think that is a very fair question, and I think that people on our side, people on Heaven and my side, need to kind of answer that question, because, I always think, and Heaven won't agree with this, that there is no incentive for the Labour Party to grow the economy, because every time they run out of money, they just say they need more than you do.
Okay, Heaven?
I'm not going to bite, Tom. I'm not going to bite. Just the Welsh UK Labour question. That's a really good question, actually, because you could see Welsh Labour, certainly in the eyes of many people during the pandemic, has been quite different from UK Labour. We saw that in the election results here in Wales compared to the similar results in England, different results in England. But I think when you stand as an MP, you stand for Westminster, you stand on a UK Labour manifesto, and there are mechanisms within the party to ensure that those voices in all the different parts of the party across the UK have a say in what goes into that, various policy forums. And also, I think, what UK Labour need to tackle is how do they get out of London? How do they get the north of England into this? How do they get Scotland into this, Wales into this? Keir Starmer's attended a Labour group in the Senedd and told us about, very frankly, that that's what he wants to do. He wants to see, he told us, the biggest devolution of economic power that's happened since the war. But the issue, I think, from our perspective is, does he believe that political power should be devolved? I think that's a challenge we need to put to him, and I did put it to him. And his answer was, well, Gordon Brown is working on this for me. Now, what we need to see, and to hear the cynical laughter, what we do need to see is that what Gordon Brown produces for Scotland and England is enacted, but also the fact that the Constitutional Convention that currently exists, chaired by Professor Laura McAllister, she'll forgive me for that, and Rowan Williams, Dr. Rowan Williams, has an input into UK Labour policy, and that's the mission that we have. And I think that can happen. I'm optimistic that can happen. Not everybody will agree, but I'm optimistic that can happen. So I do see that there is. I understand the tension, and you are right to identify it, but I think that tension can be resolved.
Okay, thank you. To the lady in front row. I'm told your name's Pat. Thank you, Pat.
Yeah, okay. I think I had to know that. Oh, right. Well, okay. Heaven and you could know all about this. This is a very sad story. And it's happening today when we should all be worrying about the greenness of Wales and the climate change and all the rest of it. But that castle has been now given planning permission by the county council to a developer, and the Senedd were unable to help. And we're now having a petition. I was advised that we should have a petition about it. I would be really pleased if everybody here would sign.
Can I just say, is there a question about Welsh independence?
No, no. What I said was, how can Welsh independence help this situation? We don't have enough money. The county councils don't have enough money. All our school education and history has been about the British Empire. This is why people don't think about Wales as much as they do about the
Okay. Well, all right then. Well, let's put that question forward then around Welsh culture. Is Welsh independence necessary to help promote and safeguard Welsh culture? Is anyone wants to take that?
Repair castles in my constituency, so I can. I've worked with Pat on this. This is a huge issue. The problem, I think, Pat, is the castle is privately owned and it's going to disrepair. And I would say that there needs to be a mechanism to intervene and compulsory purchase that. But I think there's an economic case to be made to do that as well. So it's been incredibly frustrating. But I think it bears the whole issue of the unbalanced devolution settlement that we've got, and I think that's right.
I would congratulate you on also hitting Castle in the Welsh Independence bingo. So that's another one. Go to the gentleman in the cream top on the left of it.
I think all panellists mentioned chronic and structural poverty and deprivation in Wales. Wales has got a proud tradition of mutual aid, whether it's through distribution of food parcels during the miners' strikes, which mirrored modern food banks, working men's libraries, or the Fed's document, The Miners' Next Step, which Dr. Hull Francis wrote eloquently about. It's all very well arguing about abstraction, but people need to know if or how they can feed their families or afford rent. So what would Wales do without HMRC, DWP, Job Centre Plus, or PAYE on day one if independent?
Okay, that's so turn to this side. How's Wales going to pay for it?
Well, as I said in my presentation, Wales has a GDP of 75 billion, but we're reliant on a Barnett formula consequential that restricts. We can only spend a finite budget. So until we have our fiscal firepower is the terminology I use. So until that we can, set the tax, our own taxes, until we can sort of have the control over the benefit system here in Wales, until we can have the ability to borrow, then we cannot actually, solve the structural problems we have here in Wales. And linking to the repairer issue here and the budgets for our heritage and our built heritage, again, that falls into the same category. We are defined by a finite budget that comes from a Barnett formula consequential. And until we can, raise the money, have that fiscal firepower here in Wales, we cannot then decide how we spend that money, and we cannot then prioritise the issues, whether it be poverty in Wales, which I think is is chronic. If any answer, if there's any argument, that sort of defines why the current status quo is not working, is that after a 300-year, 400-year union, we still have people living in Wales in poverty, and that entrenched poverty will carry on, and we will not be able to sort of manage our built heritage. These things will not happen under the current structural situation that we find ourselves in. So just to amalgamate poverty and castles, I didn't think I'd be able to do that.
Touching on Barnett, the very person who created Barnett formula said it was never meant to have lasted this long. So there's a serious question that needs to be asked around, well, how do we improve our system so that it actually gets funding to Wales that is based on the needs within Wales, because there is no needs-based factor to Barnett, or one that is significant enough to be able to account for the demographic differences here in Wales. And it is about that fiscal firepower for me. It's again about whether we have the actual powers around borrowing, whether we have the powers that an independent nation would have. And I think there's also a need when we're discussing around whether Wales can afford independence, in terms of actually asking, well, by what measures are we saying that we can afford independence? Now, I've been guilty of it tonight, the members have been guilty of it tonight as well, when we've consistently gone to talk about GDP. I think Tom mentioned that Wales would be 44th on the list of countries in terms of wealth by GDP. Now, I would argue that GDP, though it does have its uses, isn't necessarily the best way to measure an economy in Wales, because what I firmly believe in is if we're going to prioritise stuff like tackling poverty, we could measure our economy differently around GBA, whether how happy the population is. And actually, if you look at global figures and you measure the economy based on happiness and GBA, well, that list of countries flips on its head. Then you have the UK actually in the lower quarter of that table. You have the US in the lower quarter of the table. And you have the Scandinavian countries, actually a lot smaller countries, higher up the list. So I think it's actually as well, if we're going to have this conversation, how are we going to measure economic success? Because the reality is Wales will never be, number one in a GDP ranking, but we can get very close to the top when we actually measure by what actually matters to people, which is their happiness. and how much they can spend. That I think has to be the way you look at the economy in Wales, not through traditional means.
We're going to sweep back round, some impressive pointing there, we'll definitely go that way. I just wanted to ask both of you though, I'm not asking you to do a budget for an independent Wales, but talk about taxes. Wales obviously has fewer higher rate taxpayers. What would you be looking to tax independent Wales if you were given those kind of things?
Well, I think if you look at sort of the Professor Doyle's report, he sort of mentioned the way that sort of taxation works in Ireland, where he was saying that actually if you take a huge chunk of people out of paying tax and then you put the burden on the top, sort of 30%, actually that's a more progressive way of taxing people. Now, I'm not an expert in this matter, I would declare that, but I think the point is that, if we are making the decisions, we make the decisions based on what is best for the people of Wales. And I think until we have the fiscal firepower, so it's not just about taxation, it is about borrowing, it is about, making the decisions that best fit the need for the people of Wales. So I think it's, that's good to be what I would say.
I mean, taxation is a very small part of the wider economic image. It's a redistributive tool. And I think there are many people in this room and on this panel who would agree that the UK's system of taxation is one of the most aggressive systems in the world. So we have to look at council tax, we have to look at business rates. So I think when it comes to tax within an independent Wales, what we need to see is a massive reform of those taxes. We're talking about land value tax, for example, other forms of taxation, a wealth tax. Again, having it tapered so that those who can shoulder the burden are shouldering that burden.
Okay, what we'll do is then, as you're there, we'll come to the lady here, we'll go to the lady in the black top there, and then we'll come to the gentleman here who's looking at me furiously because I haven't gone to him.
Thanks, Will. I'd like to maybe change the tone of the conversation to something a little bit more positive. Of course, all of these various topics that people have raised are critically important, but they're almost always phrased as barriers to this particular debate. And I wonder what the role is of vision and dream and goal. And you mentioned, Will, about the Scottish referendum and there not being enough detail. But I'd like to play back to maybe Brexit was one on emotion, on small on facts and very little on implementation plans. Likewise, the man on the moon with Kennedy's speech and so on and so forth. So I'd like to ask the panel, on a positive note, what you think some of the potential benefits could be of an independent Wales.
Okay. I think it was interesting, Brexit was one of the only referendums in history where people actually voted against their economic self-interest. It's a real anomaly. Okay, well, it's tougher for you guys to answer that, but what we'll do is then, if it's all right with you, the two here will give their visions for an independent Wales, but you visions for Wales within the Union and Wales in? I have no idea. Okay, well, let's start with Luke, if you may.
Right, I refer back to some of my previous answers. I mean, it's about prioritisation of policies. So I mentioned in my introduction around a vision where poverty is a painful memory, but it's a distant memory. It's something that our kids and grandkids only read about and that don't actually experience themselves. So for me, the positive image that we can convey around independence is that prioritisation around what challenges are for our population here in Wales and how we can tackle that and prioritise it in a way that isn't being done by Westminster because of the competing priorities, not just of the English regions, but of Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland at the same time.
Christine, tell us your vision of an independent Wales.
Oh gosh, well, a fair one. I think, look, what I would say is, what the economic policies, as much as the sort of, control they have in the Senate, very much is mirroring what's happened in England. You've got the build-up of the southeast of Wales, similar to the sort of build-up of the southeast of England. And I think, from my perspective, wiping the slate clean, writing a constitution for Wales, and having that regional, so we're not sort of mirroring this this idea of Cardiff being the sort of new southeast of England, and that distribution not just of wealth and being fairer, but democratic principle of that we have the regions of Wales having a greater say in how the economic policy and all the other policies and stuff in Wales. So I think that distribution, and that's what I think that constitution and wipe the claim, the slate clean, will give us that opportunity to start again in many ways and do it in a different way and a fairer way.
Around independence, just a smaller version of England.
Yes.
Okay, so Tom, Welsh independence, if it doesn't happen, paint us your vision for what the UK is going to look like.
Well, first of all, I think the points that are being made about sort of wanting to see it fair Wales, I want to see it fair in the United Kingdom as well, and I don't see any of the points that both made about both the characters that could be delivered within the UK way forward by electing governments of different stripes.
You've had 300 years to do it, but you haven't done it yet.
I want to do those things. But you asked me about Wales within the United Kingdom. I think it's a very fair point, because I think a lot of the discussion centres around the idea of Wales is this way, has this set of government, this government, and so on, and England is like this. We see it in the way polls are conducted. Do you prefer Rishi Sunak as a leader, or do you prefer Mark Brigden as a leader? And actually, that's not the right question, because that is, they are two different leaders with two different sets of responsibilities on different matters. And actually, that's not the way to look at it. And I think the problem is that I don't think England's figured out what England is yet. I think we've got a UK Parliament that legislates in areas for England, but doesn't legislate in areas for the rest of the UK. So my vision, as you say, for Wales within the United Kingdom, as a Conservative, what I've never enjoyed seeing is a kind of centralised state where all the power rests in one part of the country. And you can make that accusation at Westminster. You can also make that accusation at Cardiff Bay, probably, where power doesn't move out from Westminster to other parts of England. It doesn't move out from Cardiff into other parts of Wales. So that's the kind of devolution that I want to see. That's not centred on the idea of capital cities and various nations, but actually is proper devolution. It's a bit of a mess at the local kind of structure, but a proper settled set of devolved powers across the United Kingdom.
Tom, someone who voted one at the start of the poll actually just nodded along. So that is quite impressive in itself. Are we about to hear the phrase proportional representation?
Well, I don't think that's necessarily the solution to every problem. Rows over the dishwasher, it definitely doesn't solve. I think you used to say that you campaign in poetry and you govern in prose. But these days, I think our politics has become so degraded that we campaign in slogans, and then we try and find a way of governing that makes those slogans work in the UK, and I really don't think that that's the right way to go about things. I think the tragedy of any referendum, whether it be for Brexit or independence, whatever, would be if the arguments weren't fully fleshed out, if the position post-referendum wasn't fully fleshed out beforehand. And I think, I'll be honest with you, I think an independence referendum could be won on those heart and soul lines. I think you probably could, if the time was right, if the wind was right, and if things were not right elsewhere, you probably could win a referendum that said, believe in passion, believe in the reset, believe in starting again, let's make ourselves afresh. But if you haven't thought through what that actually means in practice, I think ultimately the years following it will be a disaster, as we've seen with Brexit. And I think people like YesCymru, you have a duty to flesh out what that means in practice. Now, my personal vision is not that yet. I'm not convinced for that reason. But what I would like to see is a United Kingdom which has decentralised and devolved power. What Tom said was actually really very interesting and reasonable. Unfortunately, I don't think it's representative of his party. I don't think his party believes that either. And I think we've still got a way to go for Keir Starmer to believe it too. And I think there's a degree of pressure I want to put on UK Labour to recognise it. Devolution to the regions of England. Full, proper devolution to Wales and Scotland. Recognising that the United Island isn't beyond the realms of possibility. All of these things are things that we need to get to at some point. but I just feel that the arguments for the independence of Wales are still not fleshed out sufficiently for me to be able to support that.
Thank you very much. Tom, you going to make a play for Tory leader?
No, they wouldn't vote for him. That's the problem. They wouldn't vote for him.
So we're going to go to the lady here in the black top, next to the gentleman in the black hoodie. Then we're going to go to the guy with his hand up vociferously, and then we're going to go to the guy in the green check shirt behind him. Yeah.
Thanks very much. I think I come in at the right point in this debate because I'm a Belfast woman who's lived in Wales for the last 40 plus years. And a lot of the things you're talking about, my mother and father and my grandparents walked this walk as living in the part of Ireland that they didn't feel was the right one for them, but they had to get on with it. So in terms of the time that I've lived in Wales, I've seen a lot of changes in, as an outsider looking in terms of Welsh people's sense of their own identity. And the way I look at it is that that's all been positive, because as the Welsh people's confidence has come up, it seems to me that the country's getting better. In terms of a question, I remember going to Dublin in the 1970s and making the comparison between the standard of living in Dublin in the 1970s and the standard of living in Belfast in the 1970s. We were richer up in the north. And, our education system was one where we had grants and things like that. We benefited basically from the 1948 Act and the welfare state. However, look at it now. You can't, it seems to me, you can't work out every aspect in advance. You're going to have to take some leaps of faith, and the people are going to have to decide what do they want to endure in order to have an independent Wales. Because there isn't any sunlit uplands. Surely to God, the last 8 years has proved to us that selling people pipe dreams and not working with truth and integrity leaves people completely awash. So the questions I've got are, for the YesCymru people, how do you see yourselves winning the hearts and minds, knowing that there are going to be questions that you can't answer, there are going to be times of uncertainty, that possibly at the beginning the country is going to be poorer and people are going to have to suffer,
so
like the people in Ireland did.
Basically, how do you get them to take the leap of faith? That's what I'm kind of asking.
But that's the truth. But also for the Unionists, you've been the parties that have been in power, and yet, it seems to me that the moves in Wales to make it better are dragged out. It's dead slow because of the system that, this having to go to Westminster for everything. So how do you see your side as the Unionists bringing more, I think, especially integrity and truth to the way you operate?
I'm conscious of time, so we're going to, I'll probably just go to one on each side for that, if that's okay. Any reviews you want to take?
I mean, in terms of the comparison between Dublin and Belfast, there was also a time when Wales was richer than Ireland as well, and tables have turned on that front as well. I partly answered already. It's about creating our vision, isn't it? It's about showing what the potential for a new society with that clean slate could be. It's about, for me, looking at the balance of power between workers and businesses and addressing that. It's about making sure that the economy and the system that we live in works for people fundamentally, because at the moment it clearly isn't. So it's about creating that positive vision. It's about showing what we could be and trying to answer those questions as best we can, whilst also acknowledging that it's very difficult to predict the future, isn't it? But I still think there is a duty on us to try and answer the questions as best we can with the knowledge that we do have.
Okay. Thanks very much. You'll take this.
So the question was, can you just say it again, just so I can be clear? So, I mean, from a UK perspective, the Labour Party hasn't been a party of power for most of my life. I'm 46 years old this year. And for only, how long was it? 13 years have we had a Labour government in my life. If you count Callaghan's last 2 years as well. So that's 15 years of my 46 years have been under a Labour government. So I haven't experienced that. In Wales, I don't think we should make any apologies for winning a proportional election, but you have seen Labour-led governments. So you've had Liberal Democrats or Plaid Cymru as well in government with Labour in the past. So, you know, I think it's a stretch to say Labour is a party of government in that sense. And therefore, the transformation that we would have seen hasn't happened. I mean, the Senate exists because of the 1997 Labour government. And I think we would have gone further had we stayed in power. I think we would have seen further devolution. But I think what Labour needs to do now is have a proper roadmap, a written constitution, a proper roadmap for the regions of England, a proper roadmap for Wales, a codified approach to all of this. And yes, I'll come back to it, Will, proportional representation as well. I really do think that is one of the key things that would make the UK more democratic. The battle for me is to get that higher on the agenda of my party, because I don't think it's high enough on the agenda of my party, and that is the challenge I bring as a member of my party, to make my party take this and do more with it.
If we go to the gentleman in front there, and then if you could, so after you ask your question, if you just pass it to everyone behind you, we'll ask both questions one after another, just to try and get through as many as we can towards the end.
Many thanks, Chair Will. Yeah, I just wondered if perhaps there might be a call for a desk, a computer-driven entity here who could fact-check some of the stuff and some of the rubbish, some of the misinformation, some of the disinformation. Not too many outright lies, but still quite a few things. For instance, the largest group that voted for Brexit in Wales were those who identified as English living in Wales. That was 71% of them voted for Brexit and easily swayed the vote for Wales over. So let's get some facts right. Wales pays the highest per capita for defence in Europe. That includes England and Scotland. Per capita, Wales pay more than any other nation in Europe. So let's not go mince about why are we, and we don't have any say in that. And so I just wonder if perhaps we need some fact-checking here so we can get to the real truth of so many of the issues.
Okay, well, I think with that question, it's probably, I should have come to you first with the fact-checking, so I don't know how we can even bother to answer that, so we'll go
as far as I'm aware, I haven't stated any facts.
And the gentleman
I'm quite glad I probably got the last question.
There's a few more.
Okay, good. I started tonight saying I was a 1, and I've realised as it's gone on I'm probably more of a 2, because while I do want independence, I'm definitely more of a facts, please. Give me reasons, because, you know, I was going to ask initially, will Welsh independence make people's lives better, because that's the important point, right? This is where the argument is going to be won or lost. Brexit was emotional, it was the mystery box argument. All that will happen if we campaign on that, I don't think we'll have a very good campaign, and I don't think we definitely won't win, because all people do is point and say it's Brexit 2.0, you know, it failed last time, it's another failure before we even begin. So it's bad to argue on that point. What I was going to ask was, to avoid preaching to the choir and to actually get to the question, which is specifically for Heaven, what do we need to know? What questions need to be answered for you to vote yes? To be clear, the referendum's happened. London, you know, it has happened because London won't let us go. We've got too many resources, too many things they actually need from us for that to happen. You voted yes. So 3 things. Tell me what swung it for you. How have you gone from not being against but not in favour necessarily to actually saying yeah, fine, okay?
Oh God, this is going to be in trouble with the party. I think that I would hope that I would never have to vote in my lifetime in a referendum ever again. Right? That's what, first of all, like my grandfather never had to. But I feel I would like to see a debate like this happening amongst politicians of, and I hate to say it, more senior standing than ourselves on this panel tonight. The kind of debate that doesn't sloganise, that accepts as we have tonight, that there are people who have views that are entirely legitimate. You know, I think none of us on this panel are going to say someone who believes passionately in Welsh independence is somehow illegitimate, or someone who believes passionately in the union equally is illegitimate. I think we need to have that debate in a way that has been done in the way it's been done tonight. And I think you don't need one, you need many. And you need many over a period of time. And, you know, as much as I mentioned Twitter, you know, I tend to get abuse from people with YesCymru stickers on their names on Twitter, usually not their real names. But actually, YesCymru provided a service this evening by encouraging this debate, and I'd like to think that other platforms that maybe don't have YesCymru's passion for independence would be willing to have these debates. And I think through this iterative process, through dialogue, you might persuade people or you might move people. As you've been moved tonight from 1 to 2, I think, you know, you need to have that. So I can't tell you what would persuade me. I'd say, actually, it's your job to tell me that. But I think if we're going to get there, we get there through talking and not telling each other to shut up and not being rude to each other on online platforms behind keyboards.
I agree with Helen on that point. I wanted to address the previous point there about Brexit. I think if you think people in Wales, Welsh people as you described them, didn't vote for Brexit, I think you need to get out there into the streets of Pencoed, into the streets of Pencoed, and find that out. And the idea that English retirees are in some way less Welsh than you or I because we were born in Wales is frankly ridiculous. Okay, people who live in Wales are as proud to be Welsh as I am, and that is the model Wales that I want to see.
Okay, there's 5 minutes left, and I'm very aware of how I've woefully neglected the back of the room, so I'm really sorry. So we're going to try and whiz through 3 questions really quick at the back. We'll ask all 3.
Well, she's a lady, so...
Go ahead. Go ahead. It's got to be good, though, now. Okay, well, we'll ask yours, and then we'll ask the other 2, and then...
So I'm not a public speaker. That's the lady from and I'm concerned for my grandchildren. Not my children know to look after themselves, but I'm really concerned for my children. Mr. David said about, what was the word you used? Certainty, right? So if I thought, as we stand, the certainty was good for my grandchildren, I wouldn't be sat here now. However, when you talk to the people in your head office in Downing Street, the feeling I get from them is they're not even happy with devolution, that all they want to do is roll back devolution. That makes me even less happy, because during COVID, I might not be a Labour supporter or voter, but I really was glad that we had Mark Drayford in Cardiff with the attitude he had towards COVID. And you might have all this, he just wants to be different. I didn't see that. I thought he was looking after my interests. I'm an old person, he was looking after me.
So how do we safeguard devolution is the kind of
So what I would say is, you said about certainty. I'm not even certain that the Tory party want to keep devolution. So where does that leave me? I'm supposed to just sit back and shut up, say nothing, and just let them all carry on. And next thing you know, we're in an even worse position because we haven't even got the Senate to say about bacon sometimes.
Okay,
That's my question.
So we're going to come to that in a sec. I just want to go to the gentleman in the black hoodie at the back. Thank you. Gentleman, the guy, black and grey hoodie, waving again.
Thank you. My question is mostly for people on the Yes side. Do we think we need to disentangle the YesCymru movement from left-leaning political positions, and do we need to get more people who are centrist, right-leaning, libertarian, Brexiteers, etc., into the movement? Because I think that's the only way we're going to really, achieve independence is with a broad church. I was wondering if the panel agrees with that. Thank you.
Great question. There's a guy writing there. Is he looking to? No. The guy in the hat has been very, very patient. We'll go to him as well for a question.
Thanks. Specifically a question for Heaven, really. I know there was a lot of clear red water between the Labour Party in Wales and the Labour Party in the UK previously. Do you recognise that that's probably the same situation now? And do you think if the Labour Party in the UK and the Labour Party in Wales move further apart, that it's going to be easier for people within the Labour Party to represent the 51% Labour voters who support independence?
Okay. Well, we'll take that straight away then, and then we'll go through the others.
Well, I remember. So the issue of clear red water, that was actually a slogan that was come up with by Mark Drakeford himself when he worked for Roger Morgan. But I actually don't agree with it. I know you'll probably be horrified by this, but I think the Blair government was a good government, and I think the effect on poverty was positive. The achievements on devolution, minimum wage, and the uplift in health spending in 2001 was the highest uplift we've seen since the war. I really do believe that the Labour government that I grew up with from 97 to 2010 was a very good government that didn't use the word socialist for it, but had very much socialist approach. So, tax credits, for example, another example. I could just keep coming up with them. My primary school was entirely rebuilt in the 1990s as a result of the Labour government. So I don't see that red water argument actually is the truth. I perceive the Labour family to be exactly that, to be a Labour family. And I do feel that my colleagues in Westminster do listen to the things we say. Mark Drakeford said to us, he was really interested. He went to address the Parliamentary Labour Party, and he had such a warm welcome. They wanted to hear from what he had to say. They wanted to learn what was going on in Wales. I think the leadership often don't reflect that, but I think that is the reality of the Labour family.
Okay, Tom, can I pick you up on what the lady here mentioned? Is there a threat to devolution from your party?
So your question was about my party's attitude, if you like, to devolution. And I think one thing I would say is that there's obviously my party in government that delivered more powers for the Senate through in 2011, wasn't it? As well as that, we were committed to devolution, and devolution is not going anywhere. There are voices out there that want to abolish the Senate. And actually, one of the things points I wanted to make is that a voice that is not represented in this debate, and it's actually quite a large voice of people who want to get rid of devolution entirely. And it's how do we, because that's not my opinion, but how do we address the arguments to those people? How do we align it? We've had successive Senates with turnout of less than 50% in those elections. We've never had one where more than half of our population has voted. That should be a mark of shame, actually, on all of us sitting on this table, certain politicians that are sat here. That's a problem. But you talked about certainty again. I just want to address certainty because I think the points that we've heard from people who support independence in Wales, it seems to me that it is predicated on more borrowing. You talked about the certainty you wanted for your grandchildren to grow up in a Wales that was fair and that they get a fair deal. And I totally agree. But that is one of the reasons I have my reservations about independence, because borrowing ultimately is debt, and debt to put on our children, on our grandchildren, and on future generations. And that's what I'm worried about.
Nice. Okay, thank you. So we're coming towards an end now. We've got one question, as the YesCymru organiser, I think we should give them the last word. So we'll incorporate the gentleman's question at the back where he said, does YesCymru need to disentangle itself from a left-leaning persuasion? Does it need to be a broader church? But if you would like to address any of the other questions, I'll
try and answer as much as I can. Well, YesCymru is a broad church, and I think doing events like this, inviting people like the Conservative Party and the Labour Party here, and is a way of trying to encourage people, maybe of the right, centre left, centre right, whatever, to join YesCymru. So we are a broad church. I know sometimes it feels as if it's dominated by the left, but we are working very hard in YesCymru Central to make that not the case. And I think that's reflected in the march now in Swansea in May, and we have invited, as part of that, we will have other organisations that will be part of that march there. So we are doing our very best to encompass that broad church, and we would welcome any Conservatives who wish to set up a YesCymru Conservative group. We would welcome and support you in that. I just wanted to go back to the lady, I'm sorry, I'm referring to you as the Irish lady, but I don't know your name. You said about how does YesCymru try and sell a vision of Wales. And I think what YesCymru's role is to give people options and choices. We don't have the answers around the central bank or the money or the currency. We need to give people the information about what is possible. That is our role in YesCymru. Obviously we are independence-led, but we need to give people what the roles, what the possibilities are. And of course, currency and central banks, these are institutions, and I see there's no real difference with how you set up that institution to how you set up the judiciary or any other type of institutions that Wales might need, Welsh civil service, etc. We need to look at them all in the round. We can't just talk about central banks. And I also wanted to point, you said about certainty in Ireland. Of course, in Wales, we'll remember that the vote for devolution was very, very narrowly, I can't even say that, won. Now, if you look at the polls recently, of over 60% of people in Wales support the devolution settlement. So that certainty was not there in the original vote in Carmarthen. It was a narrow majority. We have no certainty. Certainty is something the gentleman talked about. We have no certainty. We do have to sell a vision. We do have to provide information, and we hope then that people will make the choices based on what they feel is best for them. That is what YesCymru can do. That's all we can do, and we will continue to do it to the best of our ability. And anyone who is interested in talking more to YesCymru, please do so. We're always welcoming to people who have, maybe indie curious, I think is what we would call it.
Yeah, I mean, if I could come to the point of certainty that was made specifically for your grandchildren, I think there's an important role for young people to play now in the independence movement. After all, the decisions we're going to be making are going to be decisions that they're going to be living with, and their children are going to be living with, and their grandchildren are going to be living with. And it brings a lot of hope for me personally when I see the work done by the FAW, the work done by so many organisations that are actually being led by young people. So the important thing for me is that, okay, we want to build that vision of hope. But the first people who should be consulted on it are the young people in our society who, by and large, have been pretty supportive of independence over the years. In terms of YesCymru, I've been very clear. I think we need to create a vision for what independence looks like. For me, that's a socialist vision. That's a vision of Wales that is fairer, that puts workers first, that prioritises rebalancing that power, and I think a position where we're not taking any sort of particular view on particular policies is simply just going to please nobody. So I think you have to create that space where there's an opportunity to create a vision, specifically for me, a socialist vision.
I'm really sorry there's not any more questions. I know people have had their hands up, but we've got as many as we can. What I do just want to ask is, we'll ask you whether you feel like you have become more in favour of independence over the course of this debate, or less in favour of independence. So who would say they have become more in favour of independence during the debate?
We have a middle one.
Well, there is a middle one, don't worry, it's coming. That's a surprise, that's Brucey bonus. Who has become less in favour of independence during this debate? Okay. Who is just more unsure than ever and is totally confused? Oh, this is fantastic.
Did you have your hand up then, Helen?
I was going to play to the audience.
Okay. We can chat later.
So just want to say thank you firstly to everyone for coming out. I think the very fact that we're having this debate is enormous progress. I don't think we would have the three main parties in Wales at an event like this, with this many people, even 5 years ago. I don't think that would have happened. So I think the very fact that Wales is having a conversation about its own future is fundamentally a good thing, whatever conclusion it comes to. So thank you to all of you. Thank you to YesCymru BRIDGEND for organising.
Can I just say on a YesCymru wider perspective, this is something that we will be doing all over Wales. It's something that we want to continue. So this was the start, and I'm very proud of our YesCymru BRIDGEND group for organising this, but this is something that will be replicated. And we thank all of the politicians here for coming, and hope that your parties will support YesCymru in keeping this discussion going across Wales.
So I'll pass over to Stephen now, but thanks ever so much.
3 cheers for the chair.
Yes, so I won't keep you much longer. Just to point out that there are leaflets and what have you on the table there with further information. If you want to read up and get heavily involved in it and become an expert, have a look at our Facebook page. There will be references, videos, all the rest of it. I'd like to second the thanks as well to the Chair and your panel for coming out tonight. Also to the College for hosting this event, but ultimately, most of all, to all of you for coming out as well and taking part. We welcome feedback, so please take part in the debate on social media. We've got our Twitter account, YesCymru BRIDGEND, and also our Facebook, YesCymru BRIDGEND. And Martin is waving at me from the back.
One last point for the lady in the front here. Anybody who's interested in signing her petition, if you'd like to see her afterwards.
Thank you all.